Session 19. Good evening. I would like to continue with some more personal data if this will not bother you. Anytime you become uncomfortable, you have only to say the word. I am not a doctor, but I am certainly giving you a dose. I did not mean that Ruber should handle all your personal matters by any means. Such a suggestion was not my intention. I merely mean that when Ruber feels strongly one way or another about a particular situation, that you should give the matter deep thought and consideration. Since you can usually, not always but usually, trust his intuitions, I did suggest that for the present you trust Ruber's intuitions in the matter of your parents while you caught up with the technique of dissociation. There is no need for you to follow Ruber's lead in all directions. I merely want you to examine your own ideas as to what is practical, because often your ideas have been practical for the short term only, and in many cases, though not all Ruber's seemingly unpractical notions have been based on very practical psychological knowledge. For example, had you left your last job when you were first very strongly tempted to do so, and when Ruber urged you to do so, you would not have become sick in the way that you were. There would have been a period of financial strain, but it would have been over by now, and it would have been a period of financial difficulties mainly. That is, you would have found yourself capable of dealing with the problem, since you would not have used up so much energy as you tried to hold off the inevitable. In the latter case, which you followed, you allowed your psychic energies to drop to a very low and dangerous ebb, from which you are now just emerging. I have been dealing with you first since you were very ill, and I would like to give you some insight to prevent such an occurrence in the future. And you must remember that the tragic possibilities discussed in our previous session represent but one sample of such possibilities that are occurring constantly with every individual and every family. Because Ruber has been somewhat annoyed with me and because I do not want to hurt either of you, let me say again that you averted many tragedies, and if you did not always take the easiest or the best course, you have never taken the worst course, and you have never acted through malice. Now I hope Ruber will stop yapping like an angry cur, and let me continue. Because Ruber's background in this life was partly bizarre in a way and certainly unpleasant, he became beautifully efficient as far as sensing the approach of psychic storms is concerned, and very adept at sensing modes, and also amazingly efficient in learning self-protective devices. It is true that Ruber can also be trapped by his own capacity for protection. In his case, this amounts to a stubborn refusal to see what he does not want to see. However, this mechanism seldom actually goes haywire in this manner. This represents merely a possibility that could occur. I intend to go into Ruber's peculiarities at my leisure, and I will. Nevertheless, it is still you, Joseph, with whom I will be concerned for a while. The fact remains that Ruber's intuitions have been of fairly high quality. It is true that your particular talents can give variety and reason to many of Ruber's ideas. In many cases, you could, for example, accept Ruber's basic intuitive impulse, and then make your own changes. For example, you could have left your position at a much earlier time and then made your own plans accordingly. When you both are intuitively attracted to the same proposed move, then in most cases, it would be wise to make it. Because you are so is the word wobbly. After your exercises, I suggest a short break. As far as mediums are concerned, for that matter, the term is rather ridiculous. From my point of view, it is like saying that some people are breviers and some are not. Everyone is a medium, unwittingly and yet knowingly. It is well known to your scientists, or it should be, that you bring many things about without knowing how you do so. Your so-called mediums are simply people who know more about what they are doing. You are learning step by step how to gain access to abilities that you have always enjoyed, always used to some extent, and which have helped mold the exterior circumstances of your life and given your personality much of its meaning. You will learn more. You can use these abilities in a practical manner, and you have already begun to do so to some extent. I have given you enough personal data for a time, but I will add to this material as I see fit. Mental insights have much to do with psychic phenomena naturally, as they have to do with the transformation of energy on any level and of any kind. I will also continue with your fifth dimension material, add much to the time discussion, and go into some elements of existence on other planes that are different from your own. This will all take time, and we have plenty of time, so there is no difficulty there. Mental insights are the transformers, and as I have said, they are extremely important. I have spoken of the inner and outer senses to make our discussion easier. However, you must know by now that there is no actual distinction between inner and outer. The apparent outer senses are merely concerned with the particular camouflage of a particular plane. The inner senses are concerned with vitalities beneath the camouflage. These inner senses, if I may use an analogy again, are like hidden underground trains that carry important fuel from one country to another. In the various countries, the fuel may be used for different purposes. The inhabitants of these imaginary countries may change the appearance of the fuel, but the fuel is all derived from the same source and supplies each various country, while the train itself travels deeply within each country and finds no barriers to keep it out. I will go into this more deeply also. I am merely presenting a brief outline of the direction in which this material will go in the future. If you will ignore the apparent distinction between inner and outer senses, you will get along at a faster rate, even though they are not different things. I must speak of them differently because they appear so on your plane. This is caused, of course, by the typical camouflage distortion effect, which occurs on almost every plane to some extent. The tree bark, for example, is not really divided from the rest of the tree, yet I must speak as if it were so divided, because this is one of the apparent effects that you see, and I could not ignore what you insist was the evidence of your senses. The evidence of your senses is usually camouflage. Let that one sink in. The inner senses deal with what actually is. The inner senses are the carriers of our fuel. That is, they can be likened to the various cars of our imaginary train. It takes some doing to be aware of this fuel, since it is so instantly transformed by the outer senses into the stuff of camouflage. The process involved is subconscious. You can hardly catch yourself at it, and yet, with training you will be able to catch yourself in the act. Almost, but not quite. Our invisible fuel carried to us by our inner senses could be likened to the air which you breathe, and which on a cold day is so difficult to perceive. You cannot see a handful of air, though your hands may be full of it. You know its effects. You breathe it constantly, but consciously you do not realize what you are doing. You do not know how air tastes unless you really think hard about it. It is fuel to your physical body, and the idea of it comes very close to this fuel of the inner senses, which is not a camouflage effect and which is our vitality unsolidified, or the little wires which make up our imaginary universe. In other words, these little wires move along constantly like little individual railway cars carrying fuel, and also are composed of the very fuel themselves. Do you need a break? Ralph said, no said. Say said, using air again as a simple analogy to our fuel for the inner senses, which is converted by the various countries or planes for their own purposes, and therefore camouflaged. Air in its pure state is not observed easily, and permeating everything. It could almost pass unnoticed itself since it takes on the form of that which it composes. Surely you see where that leads us. If you will forgive me, my dear Joseph, you are full of air. I won't say hot air, but you look like a man. The man form, the physical form, is a camouflage that you see. You do not see the air of which you are composed when you look into a mirror. You are also composed of much water, yet you do not see a wet, spongy mass when you look into the glass. At least, I hope not. You see the camouflage or the physical form. I have added here the addition of water to air, yet they are composed of the same elements. The elements are the blocks which build our camouflage. Air and water have many forms even on your plane. The elements change position constantly to transform the inner vitality or fuel from one camouflage pattern to another. Then, why is it so difficult to understand that this happens on other planes and under different camouflage sequences? You scientists are correct in supposing that the universe is composed of the same elements that can be found on your plane. However, what they know as elements are of course particular camouflage patterns that may show themselves in a completely different form somewhere else. Our last session was a very long one. I will not keep you that long this evening. However, I do suggest that you play around with your own camouflage patterns for a few moments, and then I will continue. And remember, if you can find anything personal in camouflage patterns, then I am done for. Again, your elements, those that you know and those that you will discover, and the elements you will create, are only camouflages of the basic stuff or vitality, which you will not discover with your outer senses. Your scientists will discover that their tools are no longer adequate, because man has such a sense of curiosity. The scientists on your plane will be forced finally to use their own inner senses. Otherwise, they will be dealing with camouflage only and find themselves in a blind alley. Not because their eyes are closed, but because they are not using the right set of eyes. You will come no closer to knowledge of the fifth dimension until you use the inner senses as tools of perception. The basic rules of the universe, as I have said, appear differently on different planes. The camouflage is necessary at this stage of development. Intricate, complicated, various, and beyond understanding of the outer senses, which are the perceptors of camouflage itself, peculiarly adapted to see under particular circumstances. You cannot use camouflage to see through camouflage. They are basic rules in the universe. The inner senses use these rules consistently and well. It is only the inner senses which will give you any evidence at all of the basic nature of life itself, since very often the vitality or stuff of the universe seems as innocuous as air might seem to you. Then look for what you do not see. Explore places that appear empty, for they are full. Look between events. What you see clearly with your outer senses is camouflage. I am not suggesting that you take everything on faith. Nothing of the sort. I am saying that what seems vacant lacks camouflage, and therefore, if this is explored, it will yield evidence. I hope I have not carried you too far too fast. Effects would seem to be evidence, and therefore, when you probe into seemingly empty spaces, you will receive effects which will be evidence. In concrete terms, if a tree branch blows, you can take it for granted that something moves the branch. You know wind by its effects. No one has seen wind, but since at times its effects are so observable, it would be idiocy to say that wind did not exist. Therefore, you will come up against the basic stuff of the universe and feel its effects, though your outer senses will not necessarily perceive it. Granted, your camouflage is in itself an effect. If you look at the observable physical world in this life, you can. It is true. There is something about the basic rules of the universe. If you take into consideration camouflage distortion, there is so much to be said here. And you have so much to learn that sometimes I have to admit that I am appalled. Your own experience with creativity should serve you well as far as this discussion goes. When you paint a picture, my dear egotistical Joseph, you are dealing with a transformation of energy and a transformation of camouflage pattern. There is a moment, a brief but vital moment in such an act of creation, when you are dealing with the underlying vitality of which I have spoken. You are forced, because of your earthly physical situation, to transform this creative energy into another camouflage pattern. There is something else you can do, but for this moment, you pluck this vitality from the inner senses. You grab a hold of this field with both hands. You have it. You transform it into a somewhat different, more evocative new camouflage pattern that is nevertheless more fluent, more fluid than the usual pattern, and which gives greater freedom and mobility to the basic fuel or vitality itself. You approach a transmigration of planes. A certain distortion must be expected, in the same manner that a distortion occurs in the form of your flying saucers. The painting, in other words, achieves a certain freedom from camouflage, where it cannot escape it, and actually hovers between planes in a way that no thoroughly camouflaged object could do. That is, something that exists completely in your plan cannot be evocative in a manner that a painting or, and this is for Ruber, a poem can be. Music, or rather a musical composition, also achieves this state. Sculpture does not, for reasons that I will go into at a later time. The camouflage here, however, in the manner of a statue, is too much like a prison. I am going to suggest a break. You may fly in as many pieces as you like at once. Your scientists can count their elements. While they are on the wrong track, they will discover more and more elements. That is, they will create more and discover more until they are ready to go out of their minds. Because what will happen is, they will always create camouflages of the real thing. And while they create instruments to deal with smaller and smaller particular particles, they will actually see smaller and smaller particles, seemingly without end. As their instruments reach further into the universe, they will see, and I suggest that you put the word see into quotes. They will see further and further, but they will automatically subconsciously transform what they apparently see into the camouflage pattern with which they are familiar. They will be and they are prisoners of their own tools. More galaxies will seemingly be discovered. More mysterious radio stars will be perceived, until the scientists realize that something is desperately wrong. Instruments designed to measure the vibrations with which scientists are familiar will be designed and redesigned. All sorts, finally, of seemingly impossible phenomena will be discovered with these instruments. The instruments will be designed to catch certain camouflages, and since they are expertly thought out, they will perform their function. I do not want to get too involved. However, by certain means, the instruments will themselves transform data from terms that you cannot understand into terms that you can understand. Scientists do this all the time. However, what this involves is a watering down of data, a simplification that distorts all out of shape. The original is hardly discernible when you are done. You are destroying the meaning in the translation. The instruments themselves do this transforming, say, the idea of time or light years into sound patterns, radio waves and such. You lose too much in this process. What you get is so distorted that you have absolutely no near perception of the original. I will go into this much more deeply, as there is much more to be said on a technical level. But when you decipher one phenomenon in terms of another, you always lose sight of whatever glimmer of understanding may have reached you. It is not a matter of inventing new instruments any longer. It is a matter of using the invisible instruments that you have. These instruments may be known and even examined by their effects. This material itself is evidence. It is like the branch that moves so that you know wind by its effects, and a wind back like me by the billowing gale of my monologues. Again, I suggest a very brief break. I have learned that I can give you more material if I allow you to relax more often. Sometimes I get carried away and forget. However, tonight my memory is good. and if I may say so, my material is even better. Scientists realize that the atmosphere of the Earth is a distortion, or has a distorting effect upon their instruments. What they do not understand is that their instruments themselves are bound to be distortive. This cannot be emphasized too strongly. Any material physical instrument will have built-in distortive effects. The one instrument which is more important than any other and which has given you, that is mankind, all its breakthroughs and advance is the brain, or rather the mind, which contains the brain, and which is the meeting place of the inner and outer senses. Einstein used the miraculous aspects of his mind. Parts of the mind are almost completely undistorted. The mind is distributed throughout the whole physical body. The mind builds up about it the physical camouflages necessary for existence on your physical plane. The mind receives data from the inner senses and forms the camouflage necessary. The mind unconsciously or unself-consciously deals with the basic laws according to the camouflage effect that is vital for survival on your physical plane. The mind is the tool which must be used. The brain deals exclusively with camouflage patterns, transforming vitality into physical environmental camouflage patterns. The mind deals with basic principles inherent on all planes. The brain is itself part of the camouflage pattern and can be interpreted and probed by physical instruments. The mind cannot be probed by physical instruments. It cannot even be found by physical instruments. The mind is the connective. It is here that the secrets of the universe will be discovered, and the mind itself is the tool of discovery. The brain is of your plane. You may say that the brain is the mind in camouflage. Imagination belongs to the mind. It can be used by and is used by the brain for purposes of survival, and can sometimes be probed by physical instruments. That is, physical instruments can be made to make the imagination move on occasion. But imagination is a property of mind, not brain, and no physical tool can force the imagination to conceive of an original conception or idea. Physical tools may be used to force the imagination to move along in terms of its owner's personal memories, but it cannot be forced to move along the lines of conceptual thought, because the imagination is in reality a connective fiber between the physical individual and the non-physical entity. Mental enzymes have a chemical effect or reaction on your plane. That is, they can be observed on your plane through their chemical effect in it, but the effect itself is a distortion. On other planes, the distortion effect may not be chemical at all. I have spoken of your plane rather than of your planet, because Earth is one of the planets that contain many planes. If you are tired, I will close the session. Ralph said, "No, we are okay. Please continue." They said, mental enzymes transform vitality into the particular camouflage patterns. Mental enzymes, as I have said, have a chemical reaction on your planet. This explains the reason why a chemical imbalance in a physical body will also show itself as a corresponding distortion of sensual data. That is, when a chemical balance is disturbed, the physical world will appear to have changed. For the individual concerned in such a case, the camouflage actually has changed. If you are willing to continue the session for a short time, I again suggest a short break. The subconscious is a property of the mind, and is to a strong degree independent of camouflage. You must of course understand that these terms are for convenience only. In my cases, there is no division between them, and I speak often for convenience sake. Part of the subconscious, for example, deals with camouflage, but the deeper portions are in direct contact with the basic vitality of the universe. When you or Ruber wonder if this material comes from the subconscious, you often take it for granted that the subconscious is personal, exclusively dealing with matters of your ego's personal past. You are sometimes willing to concede that perhaps an element of racial memory might enter in. Racial memory is of course a conglomeration of camouflage data. The subconscious also contains the undistorted material of the mind, which is uncamouflaged and which operates between planes, knowing no boundaries. I dislike the use of so many terms, since the brain is observable. I am tempted to use it to cover all abilities pertaining to mind in general. This would make it easier for you. However, I will resist the temptation. The mind contains the brain. Material which comes from the so-called subconscious comes from that part of the mind which knows no boundaries, either of time or space, and in a deeper sense knows no boundaries of species or planes in any manner. The simple fact is that you are using this portion of the mind as a tool. Exercising the brain exercises the mind also, but the mind has abilities of which the brain is ignorant. This certainly is not meant to mean that the brain is useless. Far from it. On your plane, the brain is extremely important, and for your information, many animals have a highly developed mind, though their brains may be small. I will go into this sort of development at a later time. The mind, however, determines which mental enzymes will be utilized and to what degree, and also determines the strength, type, and the validity of camouflages necessary to physical universe. With this, my dear friends, I leave you for the evening. It is approximately midnight, but this does not mean that I will turn into a pumpkin. CP has just said goodnight, says. They said, when I get to you, it will be crystal clear.